I think a bigger systemic change will be on the leadership of the US, particularly its intellectual leadership, which was the one that really forced this financial model on the global system. And of course, also I think there'll be severe challenges on the supremacy of the US, the dollar, as the reserve currency of the world. The global institutional framework is changing. Global governance is changing from G7 to the G20. And there's been, interestingly enough, a very, very radical shift compared to the past few decades in the role of the IMF. Very, very briefly, developing countries had long asked for a major increase in the resources of the IMF that had always been blocked. But because of this crisis, there's going to be a tripling of the resources of the IMF from $250 to $750 billion. So developing countries had asked since the mid-70s for a sharp increase in the issuance of SDRs, which had always been blocked by Germany and the UK and the United States. But now there's going to be a tenfold increase in the issuance of SDRs to the total of $250 billion. Also, very interestingly, conditionalities in IMF loans, which had been a big bugbear of developing countries, that's going to be severely cut back. And of course, largely, I think what is driving this is the fact that for the first time, major European countries are going to be borrowers of the IMF. And of course, Europe has a lot of power in the IMF, so it is very unlikely to impose conditionalities on itself. Conditionalities are fine as long as they're imposed on others. I think we'll also see a sort of reform of the quotas of the IMF, which will give developing countries much greater voice. And for the first time, it's been agreed that both the managing director of the IMF and the president of the World Bank, which was a sort of a monopoly of Europe and the United States, respectively, that will actually be open to global talent and not be a sort of monopoly of a few powers. Finally, I think what I'd like to sort of point out is that what we're going to see is, because of this huge economic and financial crisis, there'll be very large fiscal deficits in the North. This, coupled with prospects of lower economic growth and growing future fiscal claims on the budgetary resources of the North because of an aging population, I think we'll have two very sobering implications. One is that the prospects for foreign aid down the line from the North will be much more circumscribed. There just is not going to be that fiscal space. Second, many global problems which are rearing their heads, and I particularly want to emphasize the issue of climate change, because we're going to have these negotiations this year in Copenhagen. I think there will be much less space for the North to be able to offer the sorts of financial flows and bargains for the South to accept the severe cutbacks in emissions that are essential to get an agreement on a problem which has very long-term systemic sort of implications for everyone. But I think the economic and financial space is likely to be much less to allow an agreement to be reached. Thank you.